players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Demonic Consultation, Lion's Eye Diamond, Clown Card, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their CDH and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Eminence Gaming.
Hello, and welcome to episode 89 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Losing to the Initiative. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introductions and banter for this week, available in our Patreon-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access. I'm Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU, joined by...
I am Brian Coval, aka BoshNRoll.
And Bryant Cook of theepicstorm.com.
Before we get rolling here, let me shout out our new patrons since the last episode. We've got Felipe, Kadzoodle, I hope that's an internet name, or else I'm mad at your parents, Kadzoodle, Ian, Han, and Derek. Shout out to all of you. Those people will hear Bryant's cancelable drink takes. We got pretty mad at each other for about 5 minutes. Our Patreon pre-show ran long earlier tonight because Bryant said some outrageous stuff that needed to be addressed.
I'm surprised you didn't go with Thick Booty Judge Judy personally.
Oh my gosh, Thick Booty Judge Judy, never forget.
Yeah, she was there too. A number of things were discussed. It is just $5 a month, and you can hear all our insane ramblings about that.
Also, big thank you to everyone that subscribed to our YouTube channel. We hit monetization. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That said, go subscribe if you haven't already. Help us grow. It would mean a lot. Thanks.
With that, we're going to go ahead and delve, or maybe dive, because it's not so much delve anymore, into some legacy content. So, for the first time in many years, the number one spot on MTG Goldfish is no longer a Delver deck. The Initiative deck has taken the number one spot in terms of metagame shares. Data seems to be pointing towards the Initiative being very good, including, I believe, 5 of the top 8 from a Legacy Challenge this weekend being Initiative, including 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place, if memory serves.
Disgusting, Phil. That's crazy stuff.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about the Initiative this episode, kind of thinking about whether or not it is too strong, kind of how things have been going, where, if any, bans are necessary, where those might be hitting, that sort of stuff. And if we have a little bit of time towards the end of the podcast, we're going to talk about MagicCon Philly and maybe a little bit of EDH and CEDH stuff. So buckle up.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Legacy Challenge being, the top 5 slots were all white Initiative. That's cool. It also won the Legacy PTQ, which those results were coming in live during our last episode. We were shouting them out as they came in. It's reliably taking 3 or more slots in every top 8 that's coming up. I did a quick look through recent events on Goldfish, and just at least 3 slots to white Initiative in every top 8. And that's kind of where we are in representation. I'll float out the usual caveat that Goldfish only scrapes posted data. We don't know about unposted data. It's incomplete because WotC intentionally doesn't give us everything, etc., etc. It is jarring to log into that Goldfish metagame breakdown page and see is it Delver not at the top.
Feels good.
Yeah, I mean, it is cool. I am not upset about that. I think it is very cool that something took the crown. That was almost an on-point joke, but the crown is Monarch, which is inspired Initiative. There's something there. Someone funnier than me connect the dots.
Yeah, we'll work on that in post.
We won't. But anyway, we want to kind of poke through what's going on with the Initiative, and I want to start with Gavin Verhey's interview on Dark Depths Pod. Gavin popping into a Legacy podcast has been an annual tradition for 6 or 7 years over on Leaving a Legacy. They retired this year. Rest in peace. We like those guys. Dark Depths Pod swept in and was like, Gavin, you want to do your annual Legacy thing with us instead? And I'm glad someone did. And the interview's really good. Go listen to it. Of course, the question of the Initiative came up. This was recorded at the end of December, so we're a couple weeks old at this point. And already it was kind of, generally when Gavin is asked about bans and formats, he's very much like, oh, I don't know about that, or anything I know I can't really share, or, politically wishy-washy about it, because he has to be for his job. He was very much, yeah, maybe 3 was too cheap on this effect, and Seasoned Dungeoneer should have had 3 toughness, not 4. Not dying to bolt is such a mistake. Like, he basically said those 2 things very clearly. And he didn't say anything's going to get banned. He actually made it very clear that he's not really involved in legacy ban discussions. There's a different group for that. He said nothing's going to be done until at least the end of the calendar year, and then we'll see if we need to take action, were his words. It's a new year. It's a couple weeks. And what do we think about that?
First, I'd like to shout out Michael and Billy. They are terrific players, great podcast. Happy to see Gavin go on their show.
I was basically going to say the same thing. Like, this is a fantastic episode of Magic content. It is very much worth your time. No paid ad here. Go listen to that episode. It is worth it.
Yep, friends of the show, putting out good stuff with people who I like hearing talk. I always like hearing Gavin talk about Magic, so easy listen. I was surprised when it was over. I was like, wait, I want another hour of this.
So now, kind of going back to the point, like where are we standing now? How have things shifted? Back in maybe 3rd week of December or so, Joe Dyer of MTG Goldfish was kind of poking around, asking a whole bunch of people, hey, what do you think about Legacy right now? And in December, my answer was like, I'm loving this. I'm loving the brewing. I'm loving the breath of fresh air. And I would like to wait until more cards reach Magic Online before we go and make any decisions. Now that I've had a few more weeks of this, while I'm still having fun and I'm still enjoying this format a ton, I'm starting to feel like White Plume Adventurer, very specifically, costing 3 is kind of a problem. And I'm seeing a lot of deck specialists go away from their core deck, which is often a sign that things have taken a step in the wrong direction. We've been seeing crazy things being speculated about online, like control decks with Lotus Petal to just go faster and keep up with initiative. Legacy's in a weird spot.
There's a couple points I'd like to address there. So the Lotus Petal thing, that was inspired by a tweet that I don't know if it was in good faith or not, but it was the most played card in one of the challenges. But traditionally, whenever Delver is too powerful, no one's ever pointed at Ponder and gone like, oh, maybe this card is the one that's too good. It's usually something else, and that is just a card that is played in a wider variety of decks. I don't think that Lotus Petal is actually the issue. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on Bryant's point there and just say that obviously Lotus Petal is a problematic card. That card is fucked up, but it's one of those things that makes Legacy. Like, Modern doesn't have a Lotus Petal. It's restricted in Vintage. You get to play 4 Lotus Petals and do cool things with it. If we, like, there is the contingent that's always like, ban Brainstorm and fetch lands and Legacy immediately gets healthier. Healthy is objective. I was in a conversation with Patrick Sullivan on Twitter a couple weeks ago where basically he said Legacy gameplay is objectively rancid, his words, and it's nostalgia and signing up for a certain experience that keeps it alive. And I mean, he's right. A game designer looking at Legacy and like, is this something we want? Is this what we want the main experience of our game to be? Would say, no way. How do we just knock this down 1,000 pegs? But Legacy is luckily, you get Draft, Standard, Pioneer, Modern. You got to go a long way before you hit what we're up to. And yeah, Legacy's busted. Lotus Petal's busted. Banning Lotus Petal to slow down White Plume Adventure seems like a preposterous take if anyone was actually making that point.
So Phil mentioned 2 other things I'd like to address here. So shout out to Joe Dyer and his team, the Metagame collection people. Some people on Twitter, mainly Jax that I saw because I follow Jax. Jax just has terrific combo deck ideas. And they shared that over the course of the last few events, 50% of the metagame has been either Blue-Red Delver or Initiative. That is astronomical for Legacy. We've never really seen numbers like that before. Even in the unhealthiest metagames that I can think of, it's never been 50% of 2 decks. That said, when I'm playing leagues, it doesn't feel as unhealthy as the numbers show. It is a lot of mono-white Initiative in leagues, like a lot, but it doesn't feel as bad as some of the other oppressive metagames like Oko to me in Dreadhorde. Like, it doesn't feel that bad. That said, this is personal taste. Take it with a grain of salt, that sort of thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is it is a really good time in Legacy right now to be a brewer. We talked about that in the last episode. Everything's moving. People are adjusting. People are trying things like Stifle in their control decks right now. I just dropped green. I cut Veil of Summer from the Epic Storm. I'm playing Silence and Prismatic Ending. It's fun seeing everyone's changes and motions and what they're doing. And I think that's brought a little bit of life back into the format, which has been lacking for the last year, in my opinion.
I had Pokemoki emerge from the dead sliding into my DMs earlier this week. He's been kind of cold on Magic for a while. He was playing Flesh and Blood, just really doing other stuff, and popped into my DMs. He's like, basically, I love a solved metagame, and I think I can find something that beats the big two. We kicked a few ideas back and forth, and then later that night, he posted a 5-0 with updated Pokepile, with Stifle, Uro, just pure rug colors. He's got basic lands. He's got Ice Fang Coatl that could fly over, poke the initiative. We're bringing brewers out of retirement here. It's an exciting time to exploit something that is unhealthy.
Yeah, at the same time, I haven't seen people leaving Legacy because of the initiative, but I have seen very prominent deck specialists just say, I tried to beat this deck and I couldn't. I cannot play my deck that I am known for right now. I know the lands pilots in particular have gotten really frustrated, and some of them have shifted to playing just white initiative in a, like, I can't beat them, I'm going to join them move. Like, ride that out until something happens one way or another.
Yep. I think all of the Death and Taxes players on the Earth are just doing initiative stuff now.
Yeah. What percent of the metagame do you think Death and Taxes is right now?
I don't believe it's on the front page of Goldfish anymore.
It is not.
Yeah.
We are down to, I believe, 2% of the metagame. And
right.
Death and Taxes for years has been hovering in like roughly the 7% ballpark.
1.1% of the meta.
Yeah, it was just earlier this year that David Lance was, sliding over from Ohio, showing up at my local events. I made a lot of innovations in the Bant Shell just because Yorion Death and Taxes was such a monster to have to grind through. It's gone. That was earlier this year. Yorion Taxes, remember that? That was a huge part of the metagame, and now it's not.
I think I have some D&T tech that's actually good. I recorded I shouldn't say the results because the video won't be live by the time this podcast airs. I recorded a very good league with Yorion D&T featuring Sarah Paragon, which is a 3/4 that can wall like the Delvers and Dragon Rage channelers of the world, while also bringing back the early bodies that you trade with like initiative creatures. That card felt very real to me. I don't know that D&T can just compete with the initiative. I think the answer is no, but I had a fantastic league in a way that I wasn't expecting, and I expected nothing from a card and saw actual potential.
Yeah, Sarah Paragon has a lot of similar words on it to Luris, doesn't it? I don't know exactly what that card does, but I know it casts cheap spells out of your graveyard.
All right, so this is 2 colorless and 2 white for a 3/4 Flying Angel. Once during each one of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. So I had a bunch of incredibly grindy games that card single-handedly dug me out of by like redeploying Stoneforge Mystics and Thalias and whatnot. Like pulling a wasteland from your graveyard, destroying a land, and then gaining 2 life was a pretty big swing. I think this is better than the Seasoned Dungeoneer that some people are trying out in Death and Taxes, because I played Seasoned Dungeoneer and it rotted in my hand and was unplayable. I don't know. If you have the Death and Taxes skill set, you should just be playing white initiative right now. So like all of this is probably moot.
Going back to the point that set this all off, I've seen a number of deck specialists and just the deck agnostic folks, not just deck specialists, but the people who always play the best thing, like Andrea Mengucci, won the PTQ. We mentioned him earlier. He also, I saw a tweet from him. He was excitedly driving over an hour to get to a Tuesday night Legacy event just because he wanted to play white initiative in paper at least once. That is the behavior of someone who, is tapped into Underworld Breach or whatever. They have the tech, they know they have the tech, and they want to feel something while they still can.
So something that's been brought up a handful of times on Twitter and other places recently is the comparison of White Plume Adventurer to Oko. So Oko brought a special sort of hell to Legacy, where many like macro archetypes were just completely invalidated by its power, and what was and wasn't playable resolved around Oko, and to a lesser extent the supporting cast like Arkham's Astrolabe and Uro as well. White Plume Adventurer is another 3-mana card that warps the texture of the game around itself, even if it ends up being removed immediately. And if you don't remove that card immediately, you die in about 3 turns.
Right. So the Oko comparison, obviously these are very different cards if you read them, but Oko arrives and either elks your opponent's best thing or creates a 3/3 immediately. And if Oko's answered on the spot with an Abrupt Decay or Skyclave Apparition, whatever people were doing at the time, then that elk or that residual removed permanent is going to continue to affect the game afterwards. And if you don't remove Oko immediately, it will elk another thing and either snowball advantage or slowly remove anything that you had going on. And White Plume Adventurers feels the same in that regard. Even if you have the bolt right away, now you have to take the initiative somewhere. If they have just another initiative creature, they're right back in business. It feels very similar. Bryant mentioned Dreadhorde Arcanist in passing earlier in this episode. That's a card that I've deleted from my memory completely. If you asked me to list all of the cards that have been banned in the last 3 years in Legacy, I would probably just miss that one because it's so painful for me to think about. God, I hated that card. It feels the same. Obviously, 2 mana is less than 3, but if we're in a world of castable off Ancient Tomb and Chrome Mox, how different is that particular 2 mana from this particular 3 mana? And Oko was a 3-drop, like all day, every day. A genuine, honest, blue, green, 1. People paid 3 mana for that. There was not a way to cheat it into play or accelerate it meaningfully, which also changes the texture a little bit. I just saw a tweet that was like, it was they're the same picture meme from The Office, and it was Oko and White Plume Adventure, and I was like, this wasn't on my radar, but now it is, and I can't really shake it.
I'd like to share maybe an unpopular opinion here, but traditionally when things get banned in Legacy, it is because they slot too well into a blue deck, or they are so degenerately broken that a combo deck becomes too good. And I feel like it's tough for a combo deck to become too good in Legacy just because of all of the checks in the format that it has to get through. Like Breach was an exception. Like better Yawgmoth's Will that you were allowed to play 4 of, okay, sure. But it's been so long since a combo card has been banned. Like I think the last one was like Entomb. It's been a long time.
Mystical Tutor.
Okay, there we go. Mystical Tutor. Yeah, I mean, over a decade. And we're talking about initiative right now. Like a mechanic that is just an aggressive mechanic. Like it wants to put creatures onto the battlefield and then attack you and get like incremental advantage. I understand that it like puts 2/1/1 counters, you get to draw a card, you can scry, whatever path you choose to take, but inherently it's an aggressive mechanic. And I think that's like kind of interesting because you don't see aggressive creature cards get banned too often. Like the one that comes to my mind is like early Modern with like Wild Nakatl. Like it's just not something you see, and I think that's kind of interesting.
A card that has since been unbanned, by the way, and barely affects the format. So those sort of bans historically have not held up well. Yeah, the point you're making, which is like, it's a creature, it encourages combat, don't we want that sort of thing? That is a tough one, because that's not the type of profile of a card that normally gets banned. I know when we were deep into the Oko ban conversations, the thing that kept sticking in my mind, which there's a lot of nuance to this that I'm not going to rehash. Go listen to our old episodes if you want it. But my argument was, it's a 3-mana blue card that doesn't actually win the game on the spot. How are we banning that in a format where Show and Tell is legal, which is a 3-mana blue card that does win the game on the spot? All of the factors that led to the Oko ban, which I do agree with, by the way. I think Show and Tell is fine for the format, and Oko probably isn't. That is an opinion I am now all the way in on. Oko being banned because of the way that it affected the format, even though the way it affected the format was ultimately very fair, but the card still needed to go. I think that is the card on the ban list that closely resembles White Plume Adventure and what it does to games.
Going back for just a minute, I don't think the initiative actually incentivizes good combat anymore. I thought that at first, but like the more I play with it, the more you're trying to give the combat step like the middle finger, and like technically you're doing the combat step, but you're trying to avoid it as much as possible, right? You're trying to accelerate out this effective 5/5 creature before your opponent can have anything that reasonably rumbles with it. You're trying to use Swords to Plowshares, Solitude, Touch the Spirit Realm to maintain it. You're trying to completely invalidate blockers with Seasoned Dungeoneer. They're like, hey, you can't block me taking the initiative back. Your White Plume Adventurer itself is a 5/5 that gets to attack, and it has pseudo vigilance because it gets to untap itself. In theory, you are doing combat, but you're really trying to like skirt the technical definition of combat and let your opponent have combat as little as possible.
Help me out here, because I'm not deep on this deck. I just know it exists. I played versions of it, but in the early days, I heard people saying things like, treat it like accumulated knowledge and don't cast the first one in the mirror. Are there weird, unintuitive play patterns to the white mirror? Or is it just jam initiative early, often, get it in?
I have played a lot of pseudo mirrors. I haven't played that many true mirrors where we were both on like a similar version of the deck at the same time. My understanding is that a lot of times you're jamming early because you want to ride the advantage before the pro-white creatures show up and fuck up everything. You have Empty Shrine Kanushi if people are playing that, which is a 1-drop effective protection from white creature. And Archon of, I think it's Absolution, can come down. That's a pro-white flyer that also has a Ghostly Prison sort of effect attached to it. And a lot of times I want to be ticking up my initiative quickly. If I lead on Athalia and then my opponent plays a white plume, like I feel like the person who has the initiative creature is just like very clearly favored, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
There are some lines where you might not want to play your initiative creature out first. If you can hypothetically play an Anointed Peacekeeper on turn 1, stop your opponent from casting their relevant card, and then follow it up with a turn 2 Seasoned Dungeoneer or something. And there's sometimes where like you have limited mana resources, so you might be better off playing a 3-drop on turn 1 into your 4-drop Seasoned Dungeoneer on turn 2 so that you can do both.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was just a thing I heard. I heard it probably 2 weeks ago, so I don't know if technology has changed. I don't know if that was even true at the time. It was just a thing I've heard. We mentioned earlier tonight hearing rumblings about people bringing in Mindbreak Trap on the draw in the mirror to get that first initiative creature out of there, which is a play that I've made in Vintage against workshop decks. Like sometimes I bring in Trap on the draw against workshops to stop their first sphere from hitting the board. If we are adopting toxic Vintage play patterns in Legacy to break a mono white mirror, that sounds like a concerning place to be.
It seems to me like Mindbreak Trap is not at all playable in the mirror. It's a very niche hand that a Mindbreak Trap stops, because like Soul Land, 1 mana rock of your choice, White Plume Adventurer is the ideal thing that you're looking to beat, and that's 2 spells. Like a Mindbreak Trap doesn't stop that. So it ends up being like Soul Land, Petal, Chrome Mox, Seasoned Dungeoneer, and that requires land, Seasoned Dungeoneer, a Lotus Petal, either another Lotus Petal or a Chrome Mox and a white card to go under it. Like that is a lot of things to stop one card.
Yeah, it stops one particular play pattern. Like if there's no Soul Land, if it's Plains, Rock, Mindbreak Trap hits that. And I guess that's the point that's being made. It's not that this is good or you're happy about it. It's that, is this mirror so toxic that we're doing literally fucking anything to stay above water in it? That's the question being asked. Like I don't even know if that's a real thing or if just somebody said it or what, but it sounds bad to me. And it was usually bad on the draw against shops in Vintage too. I'm just throwing that out there. You had to do it because the Vintage comparison, which I have much more experience with, is sometimes the thing happens that you just said, where they go Mishra's Workshop Sphere and your Mindbreak Trap is never castable. But if they go Wasteland, Mox, Lotus or Lodestone Golem, then you're a genius. And it's just this crapshoot of idiot or genius. Is this card going to win me the game or lose me the game based on this turn 1 play pattern on the draw, which is not fun to play, let me tell you.
Something I see come up a lot on Twitter, especially from maybe what I'd call slightly more casual players, is like, do we need to errata this mechanic? Is the initiative an okay mechanic? Is the initiative a toxic mechanic? Is this too much for Legacy? Is it just too much on White Plume Adventure because it costs 3 mana specifically? What are people thinking about these sorts of questions and comments?
I think that an errata to fix the mechanic is a mistake. I always prefer a ban to an errata. I'm very confident. I think that's the least nuanced that any of this conversation is going to get. I think erratas are bad. And I think that bans are good.
Counter argument. Companion. Also, I don't have any real stake in this argument. I'm just saying Companion is a recent example of an errata.
So I think the difference is that Companion was so rotten to its core in its execution that there was no fixing it. It was, ban the 4 to 6 playable ones in the formats where they were playable, and nobody ever sees those cards again, and then let that trickle down. Like Lurrus ended up banned in every format it was legal. I think you can still play it in Pioneer, right? Can you? That might be true. I don't know. But it's just, banned in every format where it's legal and playable, and taking a dramatic thing to fix a rotten mechanic. That's the first time they've done that ever, right? Like they messed around with some power level errata on cards like Time Vault early on in Magic's history. Lion's Eye Diamond has received power level errata. There's a couple different things like that, but a whole mechanic being rewritten has never occurred before, to my knowledge.
Just for some clarification, Lurrus is not legal in Pioneer. It was banned March of 2022.
Cool. So it was banned earlier, like in the past year. You could do that for a long time. Lurrus is banned in all formats, or was banned. It's back in Vintage now. That's the last bastion for it.
Unban
but
it
it was
Legacy.
Banned for a while there. Yeah, sure.
Different episode. I'm sorry.
The difference is that Companion was rotten as a mechanic on arrival. I don't believe the initiative is rotten as a mechanic. I think it's a cool mechanic. I think putting it on a 3-drop that costs a single pip of its color to cast in a format with Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond legal and Lotus Petal is probably a line that's a little too far on it. But I think the initiative on 4-drops or harder to cast creatures, however they come, is pretty interesting.
Do you think that the initiative will still be a deck without White Plume Adventure? Like, are these Boros versions with Mox Diamond enough to carry the archetype, or does it just flat out kill the deck?
I think let's let Phil finish what he was going to say, because I think that's a second conversation, and we'll get into that one next. But it's a good question.
In the context of EDH specifically, the initiative is really cool. Like, it is another thing like Monarch that you get to fight over, that you get to make this sub-game over. I would never want to errata the initiative for the sake of Legacy and take something away from the experience of another format where that mechanic is functioning like perfectly fine. I have a Preston the Vanisher EDH deck that runs 2 of the initiative cards as well as Radiant Solar to kind of power through the Undercity. I've considered playing the initiative cards in my Winota CEDH deck, although I haven't pulled the trigger on them there yet. I very much like the mechanic. I think it is well-designed mechanic that maybe within our own context of Legacy, there might be some problems with it.
Right. And part of that is that the mechanic was developed and balanced for multiplayer, where triggering in your upkeep is 1/4 of the turns that happen, rather than 1/2 of the turns that happen in a 1v1 game. Because in 1v1, it's, I'm in the Undercity, you have 1 shot, good luck. And then you can spew off Solitudes and Swords of Plowshares and Touch the Spirit Realms to stop that one person from doing it. In a 4-player game, you have to defend that for 3 turns worth of interaction. And you can only pitch so many Solitudes against multiple players. I mean, you literally only get 1, but going 1 for 1 or 1 for 2 against players to try to protect your Undercity is just not feasible when you have 3 opponents.
So now let's go back to the White Plume Adventurer question. The crux of which was like, is there still an initiative deck without White Plume Adventurer? And the answer is a resounding yes, and probably multiple different initiative decks. Right now, like, the mono white deck is probably the consensus best version of the initiative deck, with the red-white deck also having a good number of tournament finishes, and some of the other things like mono blue combo initiative deck, the white black like scam initiative, like ephemerate Malakar rebirth deck. There's other things floating around the edges, and if you take away White Plume Adventurer, all it means is that like the things that are fringe right now that people are experimenting with become things that get real focus. And if we bring more of the initiative cards to Magic Online, and Ravenloft Adventurer, one of the mono black ones, gets to Magic Online, for example, you can play an initiative deck with 12 mono black initiative creatures. Now, are those cards as good as Seasoned Dungeoneer or White Plume Adventurer? No, not really. But if you can play 12 of them and like Ancient Tomb and Dark Ritual those things out, that probably produces a very consistent deck.
Yeah, Black Stompy is already a thing that exists, but all of that requires an extra step. Like all of the versions of Red White Initiative or 4-drop Initiative or Black Dark Ritual Initiative, this circles back in a weird way to Mindbreak Trap, because if you want a 4 or 5-drop initiative creature on turn 1, you're going to get Mindbreak Trapped, or Mindbreak Trap is on. There is no Lotus Petal, Soul Land, bang. Second spell is the initiative creature. Which, if it plays into Mindbreak Trap, it means it requires another step, which means inconsistency in opening hand strength and exposure to Force of Will. If your ritual initiative creature force 3 for 2 occurs rather than 2 for 2 when you force a White Plume Adventurer. And White Plume Adventurer, the opponent's more likely to follow up with another one on the next turn because they just curve up naturally, where Dark Ritual is a one and done. It's a very different calculation to get to 4 and then to 5 over 3 in Legacy.
I'd also like to point out that there's the natural friction that happens a lot, and I'm sure both of you already know this, but I'm going to say it for our audience. When you're running Dark Ritual in a deck that is somewhat interested in something like Chalice of the Void or other prison effects like Trinisphere, yeah, you can Dark Ritual Trinisphere, but now you're stuck with a basic swamp in play. Do you have an Ancient Tomb to go along? And if it's Chalice of the Void, you just shut off more cards in your deck. There is this weird tension that exists where the current build of the deck doesn't have that.
Yeah, the current build doesn't even want Chalice of the Void all the time. Only about half the builds right now are even bothering to play Chalice in the main deck, which over the last few years was kind of one of the primary things that made a Stompy deck was Chalice. And right now it's just like, haha, initiative goes brrr.
Yeah, I just had repressed memories flood back into my head when Bryant was talking. The Reaple Cheap curse deck. Reaple Cheap was out there farming with putting up 5-0s and stuff. I tried it once and I ran into exactly the thing Bryant was describing. The Dark Ritual into Chalice of the Void on 1 deck building is such a crapshoot. I'm thoroughly not interested in that happening.
So I guess there's a silver lining to initiative and legacy, right? Up until this point, we were kind of low. I'm going to speak for all three of us here. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but all three of us were a little bit low on the format. Like, we still love legacy, but expressive iteration, Murktide, they were draining. They were a weight on the format. And now people are not talking about Delver, which is exciting. And it seems like people have forgotten. I'm going to ask a question. If something does happen to the initiative, would you like to see anything else happen? Are you fine with going back to where we were? Or do you think that even a weakened initiative deck is enough to balance out the format?
No, please take something from Delver. Please, I beg you. I have spent so long losing to various combinations of expressive iteration and Murktide Regent, oftentimes looped by Mystic Sanctuary. If we're going to lower the power level of the top of Legacy, White Plume Adventurer and probably Expressive Iteration should probably just go at the same time and give some breathing room to other decks in the format.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment for that reason. And in addition to taking Delver down a peg, the homogenization, I think that's the correct version of that. Homogenization of card advantage suites, like Triumph of St. Traft, or St. Traft, lol. St. Catherine is a card that exists. I would like to cast Predict to trigger that on my opponent's turn, but hard to find deck space for Predict when Expressive Iteration is just a card that's in the format. I worked on Standstill for a very long time. I think my list is really tight. How can you justify a hyper-conditional draw 3 when you could just pay 2 mana to draw the best 2 of those same 3 cards with no conditions at all? It just is messing up so many things. The control decks all top out at Mystic Sanctuary EI now. The 4-color decks, the Jeskai, the whatever you are. Esper control, bug, those sort of things are just not on the menu because EI exists. I think that it is suppressing build space while also supercharging a deck that does not need a supercharge.
So, Brian, I've got a question for you. This is something I was kind of talking about in an article that I wrote today for my Patreon. If Triumph of St. Catherine were released to MTGO, would that actually change anything for control decks? Because I was thinking about it, and like, it's a creature that is just going to eat it to all of the white exile-based removal, and then it doesn't do its thing of coming back. And the time that it takes to set that up properly seems really scary to me in this initiative-fueled world where everything is like so condensed into the early turns of the game.
Yeah, I don't think that Triumph of St. Catherine is a card that would flip the initiative matchup in any kind of way for blue decks. I think it helps against other Stompy decks, like Red Stompy. They're not getting through a 2-mana 5/5 lifelink. Just light it up. Fury doesn't touch it. If it comes out in combat, eats the Rabble Master. Easy game. Disrespects Opposition Agent and whatever from the Black Stompy decks. It helps clock against 8 cast. Like, it's really good in all of those spaces because those decks play by normal Magic rules. Ultimately, they're accelerating out messed up stuff, but they don't get this emblem, this untouchable emblem that wins them the game over time if you don't do more than just stop them. I don't think it helps the white matchup significantly.
As a control expert, I would like to weigh in here. Brian mentioned Predict, Triumph of St. Catherine. I like the idea, by the way, of you going back to Geist of St. Traft. I was a huge fan of that for the split second that it existed. But Mishra's Bauble, I think, is a card that would actually make a lot of sense because it triggers the Triumph on turn 2. It works with Predict. It could actually be like a really good core card. I know that obviously I'm in love with it inside of the Epic Storm, but I think you could get a real nice Bauble Predict Triumph deck.
Yeah, and we might see a return to main deck counterbalance as an actual tool that is reasonably usable. Yep, Bryant we lost him. He puked all over his microphone. But yeah, I mean, that build space just exists. Like the draw go Tundra decks just play a land past the turn, hold up counterspell or 2-mana 5/5. Like,
I like that Phil
hook
knows
that to my
this.
veins. But I don't think it flips the initiative matchup.
All right, side note here, since you mentioned Geist of St. Traft, for the people who haven't played against that before, that is a Spirit Cleric. You can use Seasoned Dungeoneer to give that protection from creatures and just like consistently bash in with that for 6 or more damage. I'm going to do this in an upcoming video. Is it going to be worse than other things that I can be doing in the format? 100%. But it's such cool design space. I have to try.
I will tell a personal story right now. There is a friend of mine from my high school and college days, lives back in the area I grew up in, and he reaches out once in a while, usually when a big event's coming up, to ask me, A, am I going to this, and B, what am I playing? He followed this pattern for Eternal Weekend, and I was like, I'm playing my 4-color control, hot band, every color but black, and this is my list. And he was like, cool, thanks. And then he registered Geist of St. Traft at Eternal Weekend. He just took out one of my carefully selected cards in my metagame targeting control deck and jammed Geist of St. Traft in there. And I was like, what are you doing, man? And he's like, the initiative can't stop that angel. And I was like, first of all, they can. And second of all, what the fuck? I have recently seen Geist of St. Traft registered in a way that was deeply irresponsible.
I will be responsible. I will put it in a Bant shell with Noble Hierarchs to accelerate it out faster. I promise.
I actually love that. Big fan.
Overall, I'm in kind of this weird spot personally with Legacy, where I adore this format right now. I am having so much fun playing Magic. It is a treat for me to record, every day when I do. And at the same time, I'm also looking at the format health going like, maybe this isn't okay.
Yeah, and I hate to bring it up again, but I feel the same way I did about Oko, where it's like, this is a thing that exists. It's pretty annoying. The tools exist to fight it. If you're willing to focus on fighting it, and if you have a bottomless collection of legacy cards to just pivot decks, I think we're in that Oko range of a large section of generally viable decks are not viable because they can't hang with initiative the way that a large section of the format could not hang against what Oko was doing specifically.
Yes, but you have to take something from Delver. I don't think you can only take White Plume. I think that would actually be irresponsible.
Wait. We need let's lock ourselves in here. We can't just be completely presenting of information. Smash or pass, does White Plume Adventure need to be banned? I'm going to say yes.
I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
I think all three of us are in agreement.
Yeah, the format where Delver is insanely good and Initiative is insanely good is so much more fun than the format where only Delver is insanely good.
True. Let's cool things off. Turn on the fire hose for a minute. I would like to see White Plume Adventure and Expressive Iteration leave our beloved format.
Here, here.
All right. We've got about 14 minutes left in this episode, and we're going to talk about EDH a little bit.
Not before I do an ad read, you're not.
Oh, right. Well, the ad's also about EDH. Get after it.
Are you interested in running a CEDH event or want your LGS to do so? Worried about the logistics of it? Fear not. Eminence Gaming's Command Tower software has you covered. You can create and manage tournaments easily, and its unique pairing system avoids repairing and makes for a smooth tournament experience. Visit eminence.events for details.
Thanks for that. Shout out to Eminence and the rest of the EDH in general community, who we are now going to talk about. Because the inspiration for this part of the conversation is that MagicCon Philadelphia is next month. Philip and I are both attending, and neither of us have registered for a single tournament. We're bringing a backpack full of EDH decks.
This
What
is
the
the
heck?
first time that I have done this since like my grad school days, where I would go to tournaments specifically to trade because I didn't have like a legacy deck yet. This is the literal first time I've gone to an event with no intention of playing a sanctioned game of Magic while I am there. Like if it
I've
happens,
never
it
done this.
happens. But this is wild.
Yeah, I have never done this at all. Every Magic tournament I've ever been to in my 25-year Magic career at this point was as a player or a judge. Somebody who was either getting paid to be there or had the possibility of getting paid to be there by winning. I am currently paying to arrive at this tournament, treating it like a vacation, and I'm going to hang out and play primarily EDH. I don't even think I'm going to bring 60 card decks unless there's something pauper on the schedule. But I'm not bringing Legacy or Modern or doing any of that.
I have a case that currently has 5 EDH decks that I'm bringing. I'll bring 1 CEDH deck, 4 casual decks of various power levels, and I'm going to hang out. I'm going to see some old friends. I'm going to try to meet some other content creators, get some games in with them, try to meet some fans.
I went to Vegas and I was enrolled in the Modern beta qualifiers for the whole weekend. And I didn't get to do any con stuff. Like they set up worlds. They set up like Zendikar and they put the weather light up in like actual size, and there's bars, there's CD bars from the streets of New Capenna that you can hang out in, and all of these cool things. Game nights did a live game, live entertainment, EDH stuff with all the Magic celebrities, panels, artists. I didn't see any of that. I was there for 4 days and saw nothing, which I would like to get that experience out of it as well. But we're just going to spend 10 minutes now talking about why we like EDH, both C and regular versions. What would inspire folks who play Magic as part of or all of their living do a legacy podcast to just show up and play casual Magic for 3 days at great expense, let me say.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And like, it's not just that we're going to this event to do this. All 3 of us go out of our way to make guest appearances on various streams and YouTube channels, playing everything from pre-con power level to competitive EDH. Given how busy we are and like how much in the pre-show we're always talking about how we're burning the candle at both ends and whatever, and we're having trouble finding time to record, we go out of our way to do those because the format's really fun. Although EDH and CEDH are like totally different needs, you might not like both of them. They scratch different itches. So Brian, as someone who recently took down a big CEDH tournament, what's the appeal there? Why do you enjoy it so much?
I like CEDH because I like EDH. The deck building restraints, the playing with 3 other people instead of 1. I genuinely enjoy those aspects of the experience. Putting the C in front of it lets you hit that tournament itch as well. You don't have to do any of the pregame conversation of I'm doing this, my deck wins in a certain way, I have a couple counter spells, etc. You don't have to do any of that which is important to the pure casual experience because you don't want anyone feeling bad at the end. You just get to try to break it off at 11. And as a legacy and vintage player, obviously I like doing that. But you get to do it while also playing EDH.
Yeah, and the power threshold is so high that if you've never played a game of CEDH, but you are a legacy and vintage player, you will know the vast majority of the cards that are being played because they are from that high power, just like cultivated card pool. When I sit down and play a game of casual EDH with some people I've never played with before, I am probably reading 20 or 30 cards for the first time. When I play a game of CEDH, there's maybe 2 cards that I've never seen before or something like that, but I know most of the pool.
There's also the fact that cards are pushed out of Legacy and Vintage because something slightly better comes along, and there was nothing necessarily wrong with that other card. It's just that there's a better version of that exists now. And with CDH or EDH, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I know this broken card, but you're like, oh, I get to play this here too because I have so many deck slots, for example, and a second version of this could be fine.
Yeah, and because you don't get 4 copies, you get to play the 4th best version of the effect and the 3rd and the 2nd, and you get to go deep on the card pool, and it's just a lot of fun. And the EDH ban list is smaller than the Legacy ban list. There are fewer cards banned in that format than in Legacy, and many of them are cards like Primeval Titan and Sway of the Stars. So it's not, I mean, there's the same core of power, but you could play Mishra's Workshop, you could play Bazaar of Baghdad, you get Mystical Tutor, Demonic Tutor, all that kind of stuff is large and in charge in that format. If you like broken magic and want a multiplayer social experience, that's a great way to go.
Going back to the point about getting to play the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, etc., I am a tuner. I'm not really a brewer, I would say. Like, I'm someone that finds a strategy I really like and then I tune it to be optimized. And that's sort of what I did with CDH Rugrak Silas. And over the last couple of months, I've been stirring over the 100th card. Obviously, I have my 2 commanders and then the 97, but I've just been unhappy with this last card. I've tried a number of things there. I want it to be a counterspell. I know that much. So I've played Offer You Can't Refuse, Dispel, Spell Pierce, Miscast, a whole bunch of things. And I sort of asked myself a question the other day, which is your worst 1-mana counterspell better than the best 2-mana counterspell? And I asked a circle of friends, and they were just like, I don't know. I don't like 2-mana counterspells. I don't think they're playable. So I went to Twitter. And Twitter, 58%, I think, was the final score. So that 2-mana counterspells are playable if they are mana drain or delay, which I thought was really interesting, considering most of the people I surround myself with were just like, don't ever play 2-mana counterspells. And just seeing 58% or whatever that number was be like, nah, it's fine. You can get away with 1 or 2. Was sort of eye-opening for me because I thought like maybe I was just being stupid, but there's a chance that there's something there, and taking that step back I think helped me.
I think one of the things that I really like about CEDH is it's not nearly as solved as a format like, say, Legacy or Vintage might be, because of the social dynamic and the 4-player aspects of the format. Like, it is much harder to draw real conclusions like from your data. So a lot of times, like, you get to build like your gut feeling of what is right, and you get to extrapolate from the limited data that you can collect, because like Bryant can probably play a league of TES in the time it takes to play 1 or 2 games of CEDH, depending on, you know, how many people are on Rog Silas in that particular pod. Like, I have been playing Winota, which is sort of a stacks creature deck that has a really big Winota swing finish, and I put a lot of time into tuning that deck, and I'm not sure if the changes that I made were right. They feel good to me. I like the direction that I'm taking the deck, unless you're really a format specialist. That's really your thing. That's all you're digging into. Like, I think there's so much room for exploration, and as more high prize tournaments start appearing for the format and the format catches on more and more, I'm looking forward to the pool of people working with the format and tuning decks growing.
Yeah, it's an exciting time.
One of the things that a lot of casual players do is they attach their personality to their deck, and they're like, this is an extension of me. I want to put some of my own creativity into this deck, that sort of thing. You do see less of that in CDH, but there's sometimes where, like Phil's Winota, for example, 97 of the cards will be pretty deterministic. And then there's 2 cards that are sort of flex spots, and people will put cards in there that are stylistic choices or cards they really like. But when it comes down to it, those 2 cards ultimately don't matter that much. You will probably never lose a game because of those 2 specific cards, as long as they're reasonable, because the rest of the deck and what it does is so powerful that you're not really going to be punished. So people can get away with more of that if that's what you're interested in. And it's not supposed to be a knock. It's just like, you can get away with more fun stuff sometimes.
Speaking of fun stuff, we've got about 2 minutes left on this episode. Let's talk about regular EDH, non-C version. I know, Phil, you've been into this. Brian, I don't know if you've taken the plunge into full casual mode yet, but I have a bunch of different decks. I build to sort of a medium power level, like no combo kills, but optimized powerful synergy. I like it because it's the opposite of what I do with all my other Magic time. I get to play Magic, hang out with my friends, do some cool things involving the Magic game engine, but it's not like, I gotta make this content, I gotta win this game, I gotta top 8 this tournament, I gotta optimize. Like what Bryant was just talking about with put some personal flair in a deck probably is not going to lose you a game. I want to flare out my deck until it does lose me a game, but I'm happy with every card. It just sparks joy, just Marie Kondo that shit. Every draw step, I'm like, man, I love this card. And that's just such a detachment from Magic while staying in the Magic space, or at least from Magic as I generally experience it while still playing Magic. And it's a great way to take a break while still, doing the thing that we all love.
Casual EDH to me is like the purest expression of Magic deck building, because like you're going to a lot of times be playing against like non-tournament optimized decks. Like people are there to try to do a thing of one degree or another. And you get to make a lot of interesting and questionable card choices that are a lot of fun. And every time you play a game and someone's like, that card was terrible, I loved it, and it absolutely destroyed me, you made that thing work. And you really get to play a lot of cards from throughout Magic's history in a way that is fun for you and hopefully for other people. It's the closest thing that I've gotten since like becoming a competitive Magic player to recapturing just like those Friday nights of sitting around a kitchen table with my friends and like just playing casual Magic with a bunch of the cards that we owned.
Amen to that.
So I think on that note, we're probably going to be wrapping up the episode here. I know many of you are, probably not sold on EDH, but I really encourage you to give it a try. If you have a friend with a couple of precons and you haven't played a game in a few years, fire one off, have a drink, have some pizza with some friends, play some casual EDH and see if it's for you, because I thought it wasn't for me. And now I'm going out of my way to fly to Philly to just have a weekend of sitting around and slinging spells in a 100 card format.
Yep. And if you're coming to Philly, come find me and Phil. We'll be around looking for games. That's why we're there. Come say hi.